In 1992, Francis Ford Coppola remade Dracula as a tragic lover, drenched in crimson silk and in camera trickery that predated computer effects entirely. Here is what became of the cast who brought that gothic obsession to life. To keep an aura of otherness around Count Dracula, Gary Oldman isolated himself from the rest of the cast during production, staying in character even between takes and reportedly working with puppeteers to make his own shadow move independently of his body in the scene where he first greets Jonathan Harker. He was 33 during filming, already known as the chameleon of the British acting scene for Sid and Nancy and JFK, and this role demanded 4 separate physical transformations, from the ancient count to a monstrous bat, a task few actors of his generation would have attempted with such total commitment. Away from the castle sets, his life was far less controlled. He had already been through 2 marriages, to Leslie Manville and then Uma Thurman, and was in the middle of a third to Donna Fiorentino during this period, all while privately battling severe alcoholism that he has said nearly consumed him entirely. He got sober in 1997 and has credited that clarity with everything that followed, including an Oscar for Darkest Hour and a 4th marriage to Giselle Schmidt in 2017. Now 68, he is preparing for his final stage performance in London as he eases into semi-retirement, closing a career built on total disappearance into other people. It was Winona Ryder herself who brought the script for Dracula to Francis Ford Coppola, championing the project years before she ever stepped onto the set as Mina Murray, the Victorian bride caught between duty and a dark reincarnated love. She was only 19 when filming began, already the defining it girl of the era through Beetlejuice and Heathers, though her working relationship with Gary Oldman was reportedly so tense that she later described the experience as intense and exhausting. Her personal life had already made headlines through a highly publicized relationship with Johnny Depp, and years later, a difficult 2001 shoplifting arrest would push her out of Hollywood's good graces for the better part of a decade. What pulled her back was patience and a role nobody saw coming. Stranger Things brought what fans now call the Winonaissance, restoring her to the center of pop culture in 2016 and beyond. Away from the cameras, she has spent years supporting the Polly Klaas Foundation for Missing Children, a cause tied directly to a kidnapping in her own hometown, and now, at 54, settled in a long-term relationship with designer Scott McInlay-Hahn, she has launched a production company dedicated to adapting the same Gothic literature that first drew her to Dracula. The scene where Professor Abraham Van Helsing reveals Lucy's severed head was so manic in Anthony Hopkins' delivery that it genuinely unsettled the younger actors on set, a reminder that his vampire hunter was written not as a stoic hero, but as a man teetering on the edge of his own madness. Hopkins arrived at 53, stepping directly into this role after winning his Oscar for The Silence of the Lambs, and he has since spoken about a late-in-life Asperger's diagnosis that he credits with helping him deconstruct characters this thoroughly. Long before any of that acclaim, he had been sober since December of 1975, following a wake-up call in an Arizona hotel room that he still describes as the turning point of his entire life. That discipline eventually gave him a marriage to Stella Arroyave in 2003, a partnership he says stabilized the later chapters of his career in ways nothing else could. Now 88, he shows no sign of slowing down. He became the oldest Best Actor winner in Oscar history for The Father at 83, unexpectedly became a social media sensation for his piano and painting videos, and in early 2026, announced a new lead role in a biographical drama, still composing music and posting daily sessions online. For hours at a time, Monica Bellucci had to lie folded inside a cramped trapdoor pit beneath a castle bed, waiting for the mechanism that would send her rising upward as one of Dracula's 3 ethereal brides in the film's most infamous seduction scene. She was 27 then, a top Italian fashion model making her first major move into English-language film, and the brief but visually unforgettable role opened a door that led to Milena, The Matrix Reloaded, and eventually the oldest Bond girl in franchise history in Spectre. Her personal life moved through 2 marriages, first to Claudio Carlos Basso and later to actor Vincent Cassel, with whom she raised 2 daughters, including Deva, who has since become a prominent model in her own right. Fluent in 4 languages and comfortable acting in all of them, she built a career that never stayed confined to one country or one industry. Now 61, she has entered a high-profile relationship with director Tim Burton since 2023, appeared in his Beetlejuice sequel the following year, and continues serving as a jury member for international film festivals while remaining one of the enduring faces of Cartier, decades after first stepping out of that pit and into the light. Because director Francis Ford Coppola insisted on using a real Romanian priest for the wedding scene, Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder have joked for decades that they are, in the eyes of that church, legally married. A strange bit of trivia born from Reeves's role as Jonathan Harker, the naive solicitor whose fiancée falls under Dracula's spell. He was 27 during filming, and critics were unkind about his English accent in a way that followed him for years, even as Coppola later admitted Reeves was exhausted from a grueling schedule, yet remained the most diligent actor on set about carrying his script everywhere. The struggle proved temporary. The Matrix and the John Wick franchise eventually carried him into a different stratosphere entirely, one built as much on his reputation as the kindest man in Hollywood as on any single performance. That reputation formed partly through devastating loss, after his partner Jennifer Syme died in a car accident in 2001, not long after the stillbirth of their daughter. He has since found a long-term, widely celebrated relationship with artist Alexandra Grant. Public since 2019. Now 61, he is filming a long-anticipated Constantine sequel, and in early 2026, his debut novel, The Book of Elsewhere, topped bestseller lists, proof that the accent critics once mocked never slowed him down for long. When his wife of 35 years, voice coach Joan Washington, died from lung cancer in 2021, Richard E. Grant wrote public love letters to her memory that moved millions online, a devotion that stood in sharp contrast to the morphine-addicted Dr. Jack Seward he played in Dracula, a man who ran an asylum while unraveling under the weight of a woman he could not save. Grant was 34 during filming, already known for his breakout turn in the cult classic With Nail and I, and he has admitted he struggled to keep a straight face during Anthony Hopkins' more eccentric improvisations on set while using a genuine Victorian-era medical kit as a prop. Born and raised in what was then Swaziland, he brought an outsider's perspective to British period drama that few of his peers could match, and remarkably, a rare allergy to alcohol means he has never once been drunk in his life, making his career-defining performance as an alcoholic in Withnail purely an act of craft. That craft eventually earned him his first Oscar nomination at 61 for Can You Ever Forgive Me? Now 69, he is touring his second memoir, A Pocketful of Happiness, still finding new ways to turn grief and discipline alike into something the audience can feel. Long before she ever rose from beneath a castle bed as one of Dracula's three brides, Michaela Bercu had already changed the fashion industry from the inside, becoming the first Israeli model to appear on the cover of American Vogue. That cover carried its own accident of history. Unable to fit into the skirt meant to pair with a Christian Lacroix jacket, she wore her own Guess jeans instead, and the resulting image is still credited with shifting high-fashion photography away from posed perfection and towards something looser and more real. She was 24 when Coppola cast her, drawn specifically for her Romanian heritage and the authentic Eastern European presence he wanted for the sisters haunting the castle. Discovered years earlier by photographer Peter Lindbergh, she had built an entire career on being looked at. Yet not long after this film, she stepped away from both modeling and acting almost completely, choosing instead to raise 4 children with husband Ron Zuckerman, her partner since 1996. The shift went further than family life alone. Now 59 and living in Tel Aviv, she earned a degree in psychology later in her adult life and works in drama therapy, using the same instincts that once made her a supermodel to help young people struggling with body image find their way back to themselves. A horse kicked Cary Elwes hard enough during the hunting sequence to break his jaw, and rather than halt production, the crew simply wired it shut and kept filming, meaning several of his final scenes as Lord Arthur Holmwood, the aristocrat forced to stake his own fiancée to free her soul, were shot through real physical pain. He was 28 at the time, still riding the goodwill of The Princess Bride and Glory, films that had made him one of the most recognizable faces of adventure cinema before this darker turn. Family history runs deep in his story. His father, Dominic Elwes, was a respected portrait painter, and Cary comes from a line of English painters and clergy that shaped his sense of craft long before Hollywood ever entered the picture. He married photographer Lisa Marie Kurbikoff in 2000, and together they raised a daughter, Dominique, building a steadier home life than the horror franchise that would later define his middle career. Decades after Dracula, the Saw films turned him into a genre icon once again as Dr. Lawrence Gordon, though the fame came with a long legal fight over profit participation that was eventually settled out of court. Now 63, he continues examining his own family's artistic legacy, currently producing a documentary about the painters and storytellers who came before him. While her fellow brides folded themselves into the same cramped trapdoor pit beneath the castle bed for hours at a stretch, waiting for the reversed footage that would make them appear to rise supernaturally, Florina Kendrick brought something the production specifically needed and could not fake, a Romanian accent and bearing that were entirely her own rather than performed. Born in Romania and classically trained there before relocating to the United States, she was around 28 when Coppola cast her as one of Dracula's 3 ethereal sisters, choosing her partly because her presence lent the castle scenes an authenticity no amount of coaching could manufacture in the other actresses. Unlike her 2 castmates in that same scene, Kendrick did not chase the fame the film offered. She appeared in The New Age in 1994, and then largely withdrew from mainstream American film work by the close of that decade, a choice that reads less like disappearance than redirection. Fluent in Romanian, French, and English, she moved into theater education and coaching, passing on the same craft that had once carried her from a Romanian stage into a gothic castle built on a Hollywood soundstage. Now 63, she still occasionally appears in independent European productions, though most of her recent years have been spent shaping performers rather than being watched by them. These days, Billy Campbell is more likely to be found on a boat off the coast of Norway than on a film set, a quiet life that feels worlds away from Quincy P. Morris, the brash Texan suitor he played, who drew a Bowie knife in Dracula's final confrontation and represented the New World joining an old European hunt. He was 32 during filming, working closely with a dialect coach to make Quincy's drawl stand out against the polished British accent surrounding him, fresh off the cult success of The Rocketeer that same year. Sailing was never just a hobby for Campbell. He once spent 6 months circling the globe aboard a replica of an 18th century ship, and that same restless physicality carried into rugby, which he played competitively well into his 50s. His romantic history includes a well-documented relationship with Jennifer Connelly in the 1980s, though he eventually settled into a quieter domestic life in Norway with his wife and 2 children, far from the Hollywood circuit that once defined him. Television gave him a second act through Once and Again, and later the mystery series Cardinal. Now 67, he recently lent his voice to a lead role in a high-profile animated fantasy epic, proof that the wandering suitor never really stopped wandering. To play R.M. Renfield, the fly-eating, asylum-bound servant howling that the blood is the life, Tom Waits spent weeks quietly observing insects, studying the way they move so he could bring something truly unhuman into his performance. He was 41 during filming, already a revered avant-garde musician whose gravelly voice was so distinctive that Coppola simply let him improvise most of his characters' manic ramblings rather than script them. Waits has said he stayed in a dark mental place for the entire shoot, a level of immersion that stands in sharp contrast to the stability of his home life. He married Kathleen Brennan in 1980, and she has remained his closest collaborator ever since, co-writing much of the music that eventually carried him into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2011. Together, they raised 3 children, Kella Simone, Casey, and Sullivan, largely shielded from public view, since Waits has spent his entire career giving interviews that often lean more towards surreal fiction than fact. He continued splitting his time between acting and music long after Dracula, appearing in 7 Psychopaths and The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Now 76, rumors of a farewell tour or one final studio album have circulated through the industry all year, though true to form, Waits himself has said nothing. The snake used in her garden scene left her badly shaken, but Francis Ford Coppola insisted it stay, wanting the unmistakable Garden of Eden undertone for Lucy Westenra, the vibrant socialite whose seduction by Dracula transforms her from Mina's closest friend into London's first infamous vampire victim. Sadie Frost was 26 when she took the role, already familiar from years as a child actress and appearances in music videos for bands like Spandau Ballet, though nothing prepared her for filming her own exorcism scene using a substance the crew mixed from pea soup and oatmeal, still one of the more revolting days of her career. Her personal life unfolded just as publicly. She married musician Gary Kemp, then actor Jude Law, raising 4 children between the 2 marriages while becoming a central figure of London's Primrose Hill set through the 90s. Away from the tabloids, she has spoken candidly about postnatal depression after the births of her children, a struggle she has never hidden. She eventually built an entirely different career as a fashion designer through Frost French and later as a film producer, and now, at 61, settled in a long-term relationship with businessman Darren Stroger, she is preparing to produce a biopic about a defining female artist of the 1960s, still drawn to telling stories about women the world once underestimated. Elizabeth waited 3 centuries for her love to return. What would you have given up for a love like that? If this story pulled you in, subscribe to Classic Hollywood Echoes for more.